Hi, I'm Sandra Knatzer, and today we'll be continuing our module on assessments and evaluations for deaf and hard of hearing children, Part 2, School Age. This is Module 5, the full and individual evaluation, the components of the evaluation. And this is Module 5 of the 7 modules. The full and individual evaluation has multiple components. In each of these components, we look at different areas of the student and look at their needs in these specific areas. The first section that we look at is the speech, language, and communication of the student. The second is physical. The next is sociological. We look at emotional and behavioral, the cognitive and adaptive behavior skills, achievement, and assistive technology needs. In the area of speech, language, and communication, we know that students who are deaf or hard of hearing may have delays in the area of speech and language, delays in communication skills, and we know that when we're evaluating these students that we may need to look at more informal data than formal evaluation instruments. The area of speech, language, and communication is one of the most important areas that we look at the beginning of the FIE. And so we have created an additional module, Module 6, that will be specific to evaluating speech, language, and communication. Areas that we typically evaluate that will be discussed further in Module 6 are dominant language of the student, the primary mode of communication, the speech or oral skills, the expressive and receptive language skills, their speech reading abilities, their listening or auditory skills, their sign language and finger spelling, reading and writing, and their use of an interpreter. We know that in the evaluation of students, we must evaluate them in their preferred or primary mode of communication. These options may include communication that is nonverbal or communication that is oral auditory only. It may be the use of objects and pictures. It could be signs that are words, phrases, or sentences. It could be manually coded English, American Sign Language, or it could be gestures or sign approximations. A student may use vocalizations or use home signs that have been created by the family. There may also be a form of communication that is simultaneous communication, known as SIMCOM, when voice and signs are used together. Again, these will be discussed in more detail in Module 6. In the area of physical, motor, and or medical for the FIE, this is where our otological and audiological information is summarized. In addition, in Texas, we have eligibility reports, also known as disability reports, that are often included in the FIE. The otological report is information from the physician, and we know that Texas law requires that a student is examined by an otologist or a licensed medical doctor. And we also have a form for our licensed audiologist to complete. This form will include the implications of the hearing loss. The next area for our full and individual evaluation is sociological. This is where we look at home information. Often parents are given an interview form or interviewed by the evaluator so that home information about the student's life at home and family situation can be included in the FIE. Educational history is very important. It's important to know how long the student has been in school and if the student received services before they entered school, possibly at the age of 3. Additionally, cultural influences and information is included in the sociological section. The next area in the FIE that we look at is the emotional, behavioral, and social skills of the student. Often students do not have behaviors that interfere with learning. However, when there are times that behavior appears to be interfering with learning, we need to look at that more closely. These may include lack of attention, their activity level, their mood, their temperament, their attitude towards themselves and others, particular mannerisms or habits, or lack of communication and or lack of social skills. So some of the considerations that we want to think about during this evaluation is whether or not the student needs or has a formal behavior intervention plan. Additionally, it's important to look at whether or not these behaviors are a result of the hearing impairment. For example, lack of attention. This is something that will be reported in the FIE and will help then later determine if a behavior intervention plan is needed. In the area of cognitive ability, we know that general intelligence is often measured by a single number. This is known as the G factor, and it's a theory that intelligence can be measured with just one number. We also know that there are other theories of intelligence and measuring intellectual abilities. And one particular theory tells us, the Cattell-Horn-Carroll theory, the CHC theory, tells us that there are 7 broad cognitive abilities. We have, and they are known as the Gs. The GC is crystallized intelligence. And that is information that has been learned over time, and we measure that information. GF is considered fluid reasoning. Fluid reasoning is when you are able to problem solve without necessarily having that verbal information. It might be new activities or things, novel activities that you have not seen before, but yet you are still able to problem solve. We can measure auditory processing skills. We can measure visual processing. We can measure short-term memory, long-term retrieval, and processing speed. We know that when we are evaluating students who are deaf and hard of hearing, we often do not measure that broad ability of GC or crystallized intelligence. This is because most of those tests have been developed or constructed for validity and for having a need for hearing. These students have had access to incidental information over time. So if we give these tests to students who are deaf and hard of hearing, often we are not able to measure their actual ability in this area. If we do a non-standard translation of this test, for example, into American Sign Language or another signing system, then the norms for that test are no longer valid. However, we know that these types of tests that measure crystallized intelligence, often, or verbal skills, also known as verbal skills, they are often the best predictor of academic performance. So often, students who are deaf and hard of hearing are given a nonverbal IQ and test, an IQ test. We know that best practice continues to support the use of nonverbal IQ as the best estimate of general intelligence because those verbal skills have been removed from that test. However, we should still continue to assess cognitive abilities in a way that we can know what those verbal skills are, and we're able to describe the strengths and challenges that that student has in regards to those verbal skills. This information comes from Mark Marshart in 2008. So some examples that you may hear when your students' cognitive abilities are being evaluated are some tests that are specific to nonverbal measures are, for example, the Kaufman Achievement Battery for Children, and you'll maybe hear the word KABC2, and that is the name of that test, and that's been shortened or abbreviated to KABC2. The Wechsler Nonverbal is known as the W&V. The Lighter 3 is another test that measures nonverbal skills. The Universal Nonverbal Intelligence Test, the unit, is used. The Differential Ability Scales 2, the DOS-2. Stanford Binet 5. The Test of Nonverbal Intelligence, TONY 4, and the Comprehensive Test of Nonverbal Assessment, the C-TONY 2. Again, those are examples of nonverbal measures that may be used with your child to determine where their cognitive abilities are. In the area of adaptive behavior, there are areas that we evaluate to determine where your child is functioning in their environment. So adaptive behavior typically is an interview that will be done with parents and or with teachers, and it will look at the communication skills of the child, their self-care, how independent they are in the home, their interpersonal skills, health and safety, leisure, their functional academic skills, self-direction. All of these can be measured through their tests of adaptive behavior. In the area of academic achievement, we know that learning is difficult because students who are deaf or hard of hearing have had a lack of incidental learning through hearing. And we know that most students have learned language through incidental learning and incidental hearing. Remember that there are 4 types of data that can be used to determine academic achievement. All of the data is relevant to where your child is performing. Information from the teacher and the parent is pertinent because of the issues that we know are involved with standardized testing and the results of standardized testing possibly not being as valid as it would be with a hearing student. It also is very important to determine the conditions that need to be in place in order for the student to learn. We often think of these as accommodations, and they are very specific to your child. There are standardized achievement tests that have instructions in the manual that allow us to administer parts of these tests to students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and an evaluator can consult the manual to determine which tests are appropriate and how they can be conducted with students. 2 of those tests that have specific instructions are the Woodcock-Johnson Tests of Achievement and the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test. However, when an achievement test or a cognitive evaluation is performed, even though we may not be able to use the numbers that those tests yield, it's still important to know that that information can be used for qualitative purposes. That information can still help us understand how we need to have conditions and accommodations in place for your child to be successful and where your child is performing at that time. In addition to all of the above that we've talked about, assistive technology is also evaluated, and it means any service that assists a child with a disability and or use of an assistive technology device. Audiological examinations can provide information about assistive technology needs for your child and whether or not they need an assistive listening device. And there are also evaluations available to determine if your child needs other types of assistive technologies. In addition to information that we know about services, we also know that under an assistive technology device, we have a description that tells us what a device may look like. It's a product, whether it's acquired commercially or if it's been modified or customized for your child. It's there to increase, maintain, or improve their functional capabilities. However, I want to point out that the term assistive technology device does not include a medical device that is surgically implanted, and it does not include the replacement of such a device. And in conclusion, when looking at the information from the full and individual evaluation, the purpose of the evaluation is to determine eligibility for special education, but it's also it is also used to determine the type of programming that needs to be put in place for your child in special education. This information is collected and analyzed. The multidisciplinary evaluation team must determine whether or not a disability condition exists, but secondly, they must determine if there is a need for specially designed instruction provided by special education. Remember that if your student does not have a need for specially designed instruction, that their needs can often be met through 504 and accommodations through that avenue for you.